I don't want to give my name or the exact location of the mausoleum where I work. I believe the dead deserve respect, and their souls need a quiet place to rest, without people walking among their graves out of curiosity. I'll only say that I've worked as a cemetery night watchman for many years. This one in particular is a large place, with many old tombs, and every night I walk the corridors between the crypts. Over the years, I've seen and felt strange things, enough to convince me that spirits and souls linger in their resting places. But I had never experienced something as intense as what I'm about to share. And the moment that triggered everything was the burial of a little girl, no older than 8. That day I had gone to the cemetery office to sign some paperwork. I saw the family walking in with the small coffin. It was a tragedy that had clearly struck them deeply. Even though I imagine they wanted it to be a private funeral, many family members and friends were there. It didn't particularly affect me at the time. I felt sorry for someone so young losing her life, but to me it was just another burial. What began happening afterward completely changed my understanding of how spirits behave and what they are capable of. For several nights after the burial, I began hearing the distant sound of a little girl crying. At first, I didn't pay much attention. I thought it might be an echo, a child living in the neighborhood beyond the cemetery walls. Or maybe my mind playing tricks on me. But each time I made my rounds, the crying continued. That's when I noticed something strange. The crying didn't seem to come from one place. It sounded like it was coming from different corridors at the same time, as if the girl were running from one side to the other, moving between the graves. I couldn't pinpoint its source, but it was unmistakable. A broken sobbing sound, like a lost child searching for her parents. I could hear her mumbling names through tears. One night I gathered the courage to respond, to ask what she needed, but there was no answer. Instead, I felt something rush quickly past my back. When I turned and shined my flashlight over the tombs behind me, I saw nothing. From that night on, I chose to remain silent and not engage with that spirit. I hoped that, with time, her soul would find peace and her presence would fade, like I had seen happen with other spirits in the cemetery. Some arrived in turmoil, but eventually quieted down and stopped manifesting. But weeks passed, and the girl's cries continued. Some nights were calm. Other nights, the sobbing lasted until 4 or 5 in the morning. Then one night, walking through the mausoleum corridors, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Among the newer graves, right where the girl had been buried, I saw a small silhouette, no more than 4 feet tall. It moved quickly, as if running between the headstones. The shape was small, and for a second I thought it might be a mischievous child who had somehow snuck in. But I immediately realized that couldn't be. The silhouette didn't correspond to any real figure. It was different, distorted, as if it didn't belong to this world. I stood there watching without saying a word, knowing no child could have entered the cemetery at that hour. I remained still, observing that shadow running among the graves. It was too fast. It seemed to float between the headstones, as if it never touched the ground. A second later I heard the same crying, but this time close to me. No matter how used you are to these kinds of events, they still frighten you a little. My hands trembled, but I controlled myself and cautiously approached the silhouette moving among the graves. The moment I did, the crying stopped. Suddenly I was overwhelmed by a deep feeling of sadness and despair, so intense it nearly brought me to tears. And just as it had begun, the silhouette disappeared behind a cross. The sadness that had invaded me vanished just as quickly. What remained was the sensation that the girl had touched me, as if for a brief moment she had transferred all her sorrow and anguish into me. After that, only the tombs remained, silent as always. Nothing else happened that night, but I didn't dare return to that area until the following evening. Since that night, whenever I pass through that part of the cemetery, I feel her presence. Sometimes as a shadow, sometimes as distant crying. I told my wife about it. She asked whether the family had performed the proper prayers. Honestly, I have no idea, but it's clear that the girl is not at peace. I never learned what happened to her, but for some reason she remains there. Her presence has grown calmer, but it hasn't disappeared, and I continue working there. Most of the time it's quiet and simple work, but I will never forget that crying, that shadow running between the graves, and the sadness that struck me that night. Good evening, Glenn. My name is Raul, and I want to tell you what I saw while I worked as a night watchman at a bus yard in Ecuador. My job was simple: watch over the buses at night. At one point, there had been a lot of theft. Criminals would sneak in to steal batteries, mirrors, headlights, whatever they could remove, and then sell the parts. So my coworkers and I had to walk around, make sure no one jumped the fence, and stay alert for any strange noise or suspicious shadow. Thankfully, I didn't have major trouble in that job. A few times I scared off someone lurking around, waiting for the right moment to climb over the fence. Other times I heard footsteps that turned out to be a driver who had stayed late. Nothing unusual, except for one bus, Unit 759. It wasn't that it made banging noises or turned on by itself, but almost every week, at least once, something strange happened with that bus. When I walked between the rows of parked units in the early hours of the morning, I would catch, out of the corner of my eye, someone inside it. Sometimes it looked like a person sitting in the driver's seat. Other times, several figures, silhouettes standing or sitting among the seats. The strange thing is, I never saw them directly. It was always out of the corner of my eye. And whenever I turned and shined my flashlight through the windows, there was no one inside. The interior looked completely empty. It bothered me enough that I went and had my eyesight checked, just to make sure it wasn't me. My vision was perfectly fine. At first, I told myself it was my mind playing tricks on me. I wasn't used to working nights in such a quiet place. Maybe it was reflections from distant lights, shadows from the poles, mixed with exhaustion. But it happened too many times to ignore. And the worst part was that the feeling was always the same. As if that bus had people inside, even though it was parked and turned off. Over time, I started avoiding looking at it directly. I would make my rounds like normal, but when I reached that row, I tried to pass quickly and check from a distance. Even then, out of the corner of my eye, the image would repeat itself. Sometimes it even seemed like there was movement, like someone shifting in their seat. But every time I shined the light inside, there was nothing. One night, during one of those long early mornings, I stayed talking with an older mechanic who was doing maintenance on another unit. He had worked there for years and probably knew the history of every bus in the yard. We were near the workshop drinking coffee to fight off sleep, when I casually mentioned that I had been seeing something strange in one of the buses. I told him the details without exaggerating, so he wouldn't laugh at me. When he asked for the unit number and I told him 759, he nodded seriously. Then he told me something I didn't know. Unit 759 had been recovered after a severe accident. There were multiple fatalities. Several passengers and the driver had died. That was all he said, but it was enough to make me understand that maybe that was the answer to what I had been seeing every week. That's when everything settled into place. That bus never felt like the others. With the rest, I could walk calmly, even sit down for a moment to rest. But not with 759. With that one, there was always discomfort. That night, I continued my round and passed by it again. I didn't want to look, but I saw it anyway, out of the corner of my eye. A figure sitting in the driver's seat perfectly still. I stopped. I shined my flashlight directly at the windshield. There was nothing there, just the reflection of my own light and the empty interior. I walked away without saying a word. Since then, whenever someone asks me why I believe these things exist, I think about that bus. If you ask me what I believe, it's this. The souls that were lost in Unit 759 are still there, as if they're trapped in a journey that never ended. Hello, my name is Armando, and I worked as a night watchman at a mirror factory in an industrial zone in Tlaxcala. I won't say the exact name of the place because I don't know if it could get me into legal trouble, but to give you an idea, it was a very large factory. They manufactured mirrors of all shapes and sizes there. It was 2011. I was young, around 20 years old, and willing to work whatever job I could get, even if it meant staying awake all night. My shift was from 10 at night until 6 in the morning. I was responsible for watching over the production area and, most importantly, the storage warehouse where finished mirrors were kept or left to dry after chemical treatment. On my first night, I found it strange that in such a large facility, I was the only one assigned to cover the entire place. But my boss explained that in the 40 years the factory had been operating, there had only been one attempted robbery. From the very first day, I felt something odd in that place, like I was constantly being watched. I asked the owner about it, whether there were security cameras, but he immediately denied it. He told me not to worry, that I would get used to it. He explained that it was all suggestion caused by reflections, that I shouldn't get scared, but that being surrounded by mirrors, I would naturally see things out of the corner of my eye. There was nothing paranormal about the factory, he insisted. Anything I saw was just my mind playing tricks. He said it with such confidence, as if he had dealt with this before, and I decided to believe him. It didn't take even a week before I started noticing something strange in the warehouse. Whenever I walked past the mirrors, I tried not to look at them, but it was impossible not to catch things in my peripheral vision. One night, as I walked by with my flashlight, I saw something in one of the mirrors that didn't make sense. I turned to face it, and my reflection looked twisted, like I was hunched over, deformed. I got nervous for a second, but then I remembered those funhouse mirrors from cartoons that distort your body. I assumed that particular mirror had a manufacturing defect. I continued my route. About 2 hours later, when I returned to that same row, I thought about sending my girlfriend a funny video to show her how the mirror distorted my reflection. But when I reached that exact mirror, my reflection was completely normal. I checked every mirror in that row, thinking I must have mistaken the spot. But I never found that damaged mirror again. A couple of days later, something strange happened in a different row. I was walking toward the back exit of the factory when, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something walking behind me in the reflection of a large mirror. I turned toward the mirror, and it was me, duplicated. I assumed it had to be some play of reflections, though I couldn't understand how. And just like the first time, the strange effect dissolved as if it had never happened. Even though my boss had warned me not to let reflections get to my head, I had the strong impression that something unnatural had just occurred. Over the next month, these phenomena became common. I would notice something walking behind me, or see my body distorted in ways that didn't match reality. But whenever I shined the flashlight directly and examined it carefully, everything appeared normal. I'm not someone who scares easily. That's why I took the job in the first place. But those repeated details, night after night for months, began to wear me down. They kept me tense, as if something in that warehouse was waiting for me. It became so obvious that my mother noticed I didn't want to go to work anymore. After dinner, I would struggle just to get up and leave. The night that changed everything came on the Friday before Holy Week. I went to work without any enthusiasm. It must have shown. My shoulders were slumped and I dragged my feet. I was tired of seeing so many strange things. I kept thinking that it was Friday, that I had Saturday and Sunday off. I needed proper sleep. I had started having unpleasant dreams about mirrors at night, and I was even considering finding another job, one that didn't require being awake at dawn, seeing things in my peripheral vision. With all that on my mind, I entered the warehouse to complete my first round of the night. I just wanted a peaceful shift. But as soon as I passed a column of mirrors, I saw something in the corner of my eye that wasn't my reflection. By then I was so used to these misplaced images that I decided to ignore it and kept walking. It didn't even take a second before I felt something grab my jacket hard at the shoulder. It was a real pull, with enough force to make me lose my balance. The air left my lungs in shock. I jerked forward to free myself before turning around. I expected to see my boss, or maybe another guard who had mixed up the schedule. Anything would have been better than what I saw. In front of me was a black hand emerging from the mirror. It wasn't a shadow, it wasn't a reflection. It was a hand. Solid. Defined. With physical presence. Gripping me tightly. I pulled back in terror to shake it off, and that tug caused the mirror to tilt forward and fall toward the floor. The hand released me and retreated back into the mirror just before it crashed to the ground and shattered. I began hyperventilating, realizing that what I had seen and felt was completely real. I backed away, unsure of what to do or where to go. In that moment of movement, I glanced at the mirror across from me and saw for an instant the reflection of something black and twisted standing beside me. It existed only in the reflection. I know that because, in panic, I spun around in every direction and saw nothing. But in the mirror, that thing was there. I couldn't see its face or expressions. It was a deformed body. And yet I know it was looking back at me. At that point, I didn't stay to analyze or rationalize like I had for months. I ran out of the warehouse and called the manager. I spoke in broken sentences, telling him something had grabbed me and that a mirror had fallen. I expected him to yell at me about the broken mirror, but he didn't. In fact, he surprised me by not asking many questions at all. He simply told me to calm down and take the rest of the night off. He said he would come check it himself shortly. I apologized the following Monday, and although I tried to continue, I didn't last much longer at that factory. I found a job at a warehouse, lifting and organizing merchandise. It was much more physically demanding, but at least it was during the day. I don't know if the owner already knew what was happening there, but judging by his reaction that night, it became clear to me that he understood something had occurred. And ever since then, I've been a little afraid of mirrors. My name is Marcelo, and I've worked as a night watchman at a municipal market in Ciudad Juarez for many years. I'm 60 years old now, and although my body feels heavier than it used to, I keep working and staying active because my wife and I want to move forward and take care of our responsibilities without becoming a burden to our children. In the mornings, the market is always full. There isn't a single day without customers. There are vegetable stalls, fruit stands, meat vendors, fish, prepared food, everything. And among all those stalls, there was one butcher shop in particular that always sold more than the others. And when I say more, I mean much more. I noticed it because sometimes I'd go early with my wife to buy what we needed for the house, and there would be a line wrapping around the corner of the aisle where that butcher shop was located. Meanwhile, the surrounding shops looked nearly empty, overshadowed by the activity of that one. I never understood what made it so special, except that their meat was a few pesos cheaper than the rest. To me, it wasn't worth standing in line for half an hour, but everyone makes their own choices. With that context, I'll move to the night when, I believe, everything began. It was mid-September, around 2 or 3 in the morning. I was making my usual rounds through the market aisles, lit by white fluorescent lights, when I heard a series of rapid knocks against a metal shutter. I turned around thinking someone was walking behind me trying to scare me, but I saw no one. When the knocking came again, I realized it was coming from inside that same butcher shop, located in the middle of the aisle. They were sharp knocks, like someone hitting the metal shutter from the inside. My first thought was that someone had gotten locked in, or that maybe an animal had somehow gotten inside. I called out loudly and knocked back a couple of times on the shutter to see if anyone responded. Nothing happened. I couldn't stand there all night, so I continued my patrol, planning to mention it to the owner the next day. The following morning, when my wife and I went to shop, I told him what I had heard. He barely paid attention and said no one had stayed overnight and nothing was missing from his refrigerators. I didn't like his tone. It felt arrogant, dismissive, like he was talking down to me. So I dropped the subject. Over the following weeks, the knocking continued intermittently. Sometimes 2 nights in a row, sometimes days without anything. I'm a skeptical person, so I told myself maybe the owner had hired someone to fix something at night and didn't want anyone to know. But then I began noticing something else. Every time I approached that part of the aisle, a sharp sour smell would hit my nose. I can't say exactly what it was. Maybe urine, maybe vinegar mixed with something else. But it was unpleasant and definitely not normal for the market. We didn't allow stray dogs inside overnight, so that smell made no sense. From then on, I tried to walk past that area quickly because the odor burned my throat. Weeks passed, and things escalated beyond isolated smells and knocks. One morning, while shopping with my wife, I noticed something had changed. The butcher shop no longer had the long lines. The crowd was smaller. And for the first time in years, I saw that place sitting empty. Customers started buying from other stalls. Over time, the shop that once had half-hour lines became almost deserted. I said nothing. I had no proof, and I didn't want problems. But even someone as skeptical as me began to think that someone or something was working against that business. It was mid-November, and I was still on the job. Most of the time, thank God, it's a quiet shift. But one night, I felt something that unsettled me deeply. I was walking the aisles, making sure everything was secure, when I reached the corridor where the butcher shop was located. I was walking calmly when suddenly I felt a strange pressure between my chest and back, like I was being surrounded. I shook my shoulders forcefully, as if trying to shake someone off. I even turned around, thinking someone was standing right behind me. There was nothing. Just closed stalls. The feeling stayed with me the rest of the night. That same night, I spoke to my coworker, Joaquin. He's a few years younger than me. Since we alternate patrol routes, I asked him if he had noticed anything strange in that aisle, the one with the large butcher shop. That's when I realized it wasn't just me. He admitted that, although he hadn't said anything for fear of being called crazy, he had also felt a strange presence in that corridor, like something was wandering there, and he had noticed the same sour smell. But in the mornings, the feeling disappeared. From then on, I tried to walk past that aisle as quickly as possible. Weeks passed, and the strange sensation never went away. The butcher shop that used to be full was now nearly empty, and I could see the worry on the owner's face. I considered telling him again that something strange was happening at night, but I hesitated. Then one night close to Christmas, I could no longer ignore it. I had changed my patrol route because another stall owner, a kind man, had asked me to check if he had properly closed his shutter. I did. It was still early, around 10 at night, when I walked back toward the butcher shop aisle. From a distance, I saw a dark silhouette standing directly in front of the butcher shop shutter. I hadn't seen it arrive or leave. It was simply there, completely still. I hurried forward, thinking someone was trying to break in. But as I approached, the figure seemed to dissolve into the air. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't see where it went. I reached the spot where the shadow had stood. On the ground right in front of the shop, I found a cloth doll tied tightly with knots all over its body. It was soaked in a liquid I couldn't identify. It wasn't water. And it carried the same sour, sharp smell that Joaquin and I had been noticing for weeks. I didn't touch it with my bare hands. I picked it up using a plastic bag and kept it. The next day I went straight to the owner and told him someone was practicing witchcraft against his business. I showed him the doll. He went pale. He told me he had already suspected something, because for months his sales had been declining without reason. He took action. I saw someone come to perform cleansing rituals and prayers. I don't know if it worked, but over time his business recovered, though it never returned to what it once was. I asked my son to write this down for me so I could share it, and leave something clear. I used to be skeptical too, but I had to discover firsthand that evil exists, and since then I no longer mock it or dismiss it. When I arrived in the United States back in 2002, my first job was as a night watchman at an industrial laundry facility on the outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona. It was a massive place, filled with huge industrial washers and dryers that stood nearly 2 meters tall. They washed hotel sheets, hospital linens, tablecloths from events and restaurants, workers' uniforms, medical staff clothing, everything. At night it was usually quiet, unless there was a large order and they left some machines running into the early morning. What I'm about to share happened only once, one night in July. I have no explanation for why it happened that night and never again, but without a doubt it was one of the strangest and most terrifying events of my life. It was extremely hot that night, and I had stepped outside the building to smoke a cigarette and get some air. I was walking around the parking lot doing my usual perimeter check, when I heard a distant whisper. At first I thought it came from the street, from a passing car or people nearby. But the echo was coming from inside the laundry facility, and that immediately put me on alert. It's worth mentioning that I wasn't armed. All I had was a police baton. And yes, it could do some damage, but I knew that if there were thieves with guns, there wouldn't be much I could do. So I gathered my courage and went back inside, holding the company-issued phone, one of those old Nokia models, ready to run and call the police if I saw anything suspicious. The moment I crossed the door I had exited earlier, I heard the unmistakable sound of an industrial washing machine running. It was distant, but clear enough that it couldn't have been coming from another building or some recorded prank. I froze for a second, trying to remember if anyone had informed me that someone would be working late that night. Maybe I had forgotten among all the instructions I'd been given. But no, that didn't sound right. I walked slowly between the machines, half expecting to see a group of thieves at any moment. Those washers and dryers were worth thousands of dollars. The idea that I, a newcomer to the country, would let someone steal one terrified me. I passed carts filled with dirty laundry and others stacked with folded linens. Everything looked normal, but the sound of the machine kept guiding me forward. Eventually, I reached the back of the facility, where one enormous washer was spinning at full speed. The first strange thing I noticed, aside from the fact that no one was around, was that it was empty. No sheets, no uniforms, nothing inside. The drum was spinning on its own, as if someone had turned it on and run off before I arrived. I approached, feeling a bit calmer, thinking it might just be a malfunction. So I turned it off. The drum slowed gradually, and in that exact moment, I swear to God, I saw what looked like someone inside. A human shape pressed against the metal, spinning with the drum. It lasted only an instant, but long enough for me to yank the door open and look inside. I blinked, looked again. There was no one there. Just the empty metal drum. That's when my chest tightened. I was certain I had seen something. But staring at the empty drum, I convinced myself that the spinning motion had played tricks on my eyes. I closed the door and turned to walk away down the aisle toward the exit. I hadn't taken more than 10 steps when, without me touching anything, that same washing machine turned back on. I froze. It took effort to turn around. But when I did, I saw the drum spinning again. And though I was a little farther away this time, I could clearly see the shape again, turning inside the machine as if trapped there, facing me. And this time it remained there, spinning inside. I saw it long enough to know it wasn't just a shadow or some loose object bouncing around. That's when I understood this wasn't a simple mechanical issue. Something strange was truly happening. My hands started shaking as I called my manager. He was Mexican, like me, and I thought he would understand if I told him something supernatural was happening. I quickly explained that a washer was turning on by itself and that I was seeing something inside it. Before he could respond, I clarified that yes, I had already turned it off once and checked inside twice. There was nothing loose. No one else was in the building but me. But my boss wasn't understanding. When I finished complaining, as he called it, he scolded me harshly. I don't exaggerate when I say I had never been spoken to that way by a supervisor before. I understand it was late at night, but I wasn't making something up. Still, he was irritated. He told me I was imagining things, probably because of the heat or exhaustion. He said if the washer turned on again, I should just shut it off and that was it. Then he hung up. I took a deep breath and walked back toward the machine. I turned it off again without looking inside the drum, feeling eyes on the back of my neck the entire time. Then I stepped away as quickly as I could. Later that same night, it happened again. The machine turned on by itself, but I didn't go near it. I stayed outside, waiting for it to finish its cycle and shut off on its own, listening from a distance and watching the perimeter to make sure no one entered the building. After all, my job was to guard the property, not babysit washing machines. I avoided that section of the facility for the rest of the night. After that, I worked there as a night watchman for 2 more years. Nothing like that ever happened again. But that night has never left my memory. Good evening. My name is Juan Carlos. And in 1992, I worked as a night watchman at a train station here in Mexico. I won't say exactly which one, because I worked there for many years and I still care about that place. But I can say it was a common stop for trains heading toward Querétaro. My job was fairly simple. Watch over the station and its surroundings at night. Make sure no homeless people slept on the platform and prevent anyone from vandalizing the facilities. The town near the station where I still live is very quiet. Back in the 90s, it was even quieter. I never had serious problems on the job. In fact, the most serious thing I dealt with for months was a drunk man trying to relieve himself on the tracks who got a bit aggressive when I tried to remove him. Generally speaking, nothing out of the ordinary. But one night, toward the end of October, something changed forever. I remember very clearly how cold it was that morning. I was sitting there looking toward the hills, holding a thermos of coffee to keep warm. I glanced at the watch on my wrist. It was 3 in the morning. I still had 3 hours left before I could go home. My radio had run out of batteries that night, so the silence was making me bored and sleepy. The town was completely silent. Then suddenly a sound made me jump to my feet instantly. The whistle of a train. It was loud and piercing, the kind you can hear from far away. I woke up immediately and looked toward the horizon, expecting to see headlights approaching. But aside from the platform lights, there was absolute darkness around me. I thought maybe the train had arrived several hours early. I stood alert, staring down the tracks where it was supposed to appear, waiting for its lights at any moment. The whistle sounded again, closer this time, but still nothing was visible. No lights, no shadow, no vibration in the ground, which usually gave away a train when it was about to reach the station. Then I heard the screech of brakes in the distance. And still, nothing. That's when my body stiffened. I don't know exactly why. It was as if my instincts sensed something I couldn't consciously understand. I went on alert, waiting for something strange to happen. That sound was unmistakable. I had heard it countless times. Almost the entire town knew when the train arrived because of the whistle and the loud braking noise. And yet the platform was empty. No approaching light in the distance. I thought maybe the train had stopped halfway and needed assistance. I even considered walking along the tracks to check if I could help in some way. But my body refused to move. Something wasn't right that night, and I knew it. The moment I took a step, I noticed the atmosphere on the platform had changed. I don't know how else to explain it. It was as if the air became heavy, dense. It reminded me of a time I walked near a field that was burning. The smoke made it difficult to breathe for hours afterward. That's what it felt like. I was struggling to breathe, but unlike that time, there was no heat, only intense cold. In fact, the already cold air seemed to drop even further in temperature within seconds. I felt deeply uncomfortable. My instincts told me I shouldn't stay there, even though I had no clear reason to feel that way. Instead of walking down the tracks, I left the platform without thinking. I moved toward the station exit, walked through the parking lot, and stayed as far away from the tracks and platform as possible. I stood there for a while, listening, waiting to hear the train again, this time arriving properly at the station. But there was nothing. No whistles, no brakes, not even the sound of the train continuing on toward Querétaro. When I finally returned to the platform, about half an hour later, the sensation had disappeared. The air felt normal again. The cold remained, but it was just the regular cold from before. Everything looked the same as always. But I was left with doubt. The next morning when I got home, I asked my wife if she had heard the train whistle around 3 in the morning. She assured me she hadn't, and she's a light sleeper. We live just 1 block from the station. It would have been impossible for her not to hear it. I asked my mother the same question. She was much more superstitious than either my wife or me. Immediately she crossed herself and told me I had heard the devil's train. The train that carries the souls of the damned to the afterlife. I honestly don't know where my mother got that story from. But just in case, that night I wore my rosary around my neck before heading to work. As expected, nothing happened that night, nor the next, nor ever again, until I left that job in 1996. I never found out what happened that night, but I know what I heard. I heard it as clearly as if it were approaching the station, and that sensation, that is not something I could have invented or imagined. I am certain that something happened that night, something that has no explanation. I work as a night watchman at a large construction supply warehouse. I started during the pandemic and have been there for several years now. Most nights are the same: checking gates, walking the aisles, making sure no doors are forced open and that the alarm system is working properly. But one night, everything took a strange turn. And I swear on everything sacred that I saw something that was not natural. There's no way it was a normal animal. It happened in January last year. It was 3 in the morning, and I was making my rounds inside the main warehouse while my partner Fabio was patrolling the outside. The warehouse is enormous, with long corridors and giant shelving units, some reaching nearly 10 meters high. At the back, there are large lifts used to store merchandise on the upper levels. The shelves hold everything: cement bags, glue, rebar, paint, tools. Heavy things that don't move easily. At night, no one remains inside except the watchman. The only sounds are the normal ones. An electrical hum, the echo of my footsteps or Fabio's, and the air conditioning kicking on from time to time. That's why I'm certain this wasn't some elaborate prank from coworkers. That night was calm. I was walking with my flashlight, scanning up and down between the shelves, making sure no boxes were out of place and there were no signs of intrusion. Suddenly I heard glass shatter. It wasn't a small crack like a pane splitting. It was a loud explosion like a window bursting. I froze. My first thought was that someone had broken in. The warehouse has high windows along the sides and skylights above. It's not easy to enter, but it's possible if someone is determined. Adrenaline rushed through me. I grabbed the radio and called Fabio, who was outside, telling him someone had broken the glass and that he needed to come immediately. As I spoke, I ran down the aisle to locate the source of the sound, expecting to see intruders face to face. I turned the corner and saw one of the side windows shattered. Glass fragments were scattered on the floor. I approached carefully, thinking someone might be crouched behind a pallet. I quickly scanned the area with my flashlight, and that's when I saw a silhouette move at the far end of the aisle. It wasn't an ordinary shadow. It was something too large, much taller and broader than a person. It moved fast and with force, then leaped upward. I saw it climb to the top of a shelving unit as if it were effortless. I froze. Not because I'm a coward, but because whatever I saw did not move like a human. And my instincts recognized that immediately. My survival instinct told me confronting it would be reckless. I tried to understand what I had just witnessed. It climbed like a monkey, but it was bigger than any animal I knew. I briefly thought of a bear, but I wasn't sure what I was looking at. My legs trembled, but I steadied myself. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and shined it upward. In my other hand, I still held the radio, waiting for Fabio to respond. I told him I had just seen some kind of animal climbing the shelves. And when I aimed the light upward, the creature looked back at me. Its eyes were yellow, like a cat's when light hits them, but more intense. Fixed on me. It lasted only a second before it moved, but in that second I'm certain it analyzed me and considered whether to jump down on me. In that moment I noticed more details. Its skin had no fur. It looked smooth, dark green, almost like wet leather. That told me it wasn't a bear. And the claws. Those claws gripping the edge of the shelf. That's what stayed with me. They were long, too long, like talons. I thought of a jaguar for comparison, because it's the only animal I know with claws that large. But I'm certain it wasn't a jaguar. The body shape, the movement, none of it matched. Suddenly I felt a strange urge to run toward it. Maybe from anger, maybe fear. I also felt like I needed to act before it jumped on me. So I took a few steps forward, keeping the flashlight on it. The creature moved along the top of the shelving unit, using its hands or claws to propel itself. It didn't make much noise. That disturbed me even more. With that size, you'd expect loud impacts, pallets shaking, but nothing. It moved lightly, almost like a cat. Fabio answered the radio saying he was coming. I repeated that it wasn't a thief, that it was some kind of strange animal in a hurry. I knew Fabio probably wouldn't be able to do anything, but I needed him to see it so I wouldn't sound insane. When Fabio arrived, he immediately asked where it was. I pointed upward. He raised his flashlight too, and I tried recording with my phone. I felt a bit relieved. At least I wasn't alone anymore. The creature moved again, and we both saw it at the same time, leaping from the top of one shelving unit to another. Fabio shouted, asking what that was. And that's when I knew he had seen it too. That's important. Anyone could say I imagined it, but no. We ran toward the aisle where we thought it would descend, but the creature moved faster than we could. By the time we thought we had cornered it, it had reached the far end of the warehouse. We heard something strike metal. And then from the other side, another window shattered. We rushed over. Another window was broken. Glass scattered on the floor just like before. Cold night air poured in. The warehouse was silent again. The creature was gone. Fabio and I stood there without speaking, scanning the area and checking the perimeter. Then we did what protocol required. Secured doors, reviewed cameras, checked for intruders. Aside from the 2 broken windows, everything was in order. The cameras didn't point toward the ceiling, so all they showed was Fabio and me running around. No creature. Later, we calmly confirmed that we had both seen it. I checked my phone and I finally understood why people always capture blurry footage of strange events. I tried, but between nerves, adrenaline, and confusion, I didn't manage to aim properly. At best, you can see a vague shadow in the video. When it came time to write the report, Fabio and I looked at each other. How were we supposed to justify the broken windows? Neither of us thought writing "a creature broke in" was a good idea. No one would accept that, and we might even lose our jobs for joking around. So we wrote the basics. 2 windows broken. Heard noises of youths running. Inspected the area. No intruders found. Likely vandals. But I would bet my life that what I saw was real. And that there is something out there. Something strange. Hiding in the wilderness of our country. A sinister creature. And far more intelligent than we might think. I will never forget the way it stared at me. Because I'm certain that for that brief moment, my life was in its hands.